Hi everyone, my name is Paula and welcome to Spark Studio. It seems like many people I know are having babies these days, and in particular in my family I've had, I believe, 3, maybe 4 nephews. I'm losing count. Anyway, several nephews that are having babies, and I've made a couple quilts already and I have 2 more yet to go. So today I'm starting one for one of my nephews. Now his wife happens to be from China, and so I want to incorporate some of her heritage in this quilt as well. And this year is the year of the dragon. So I'm going to be making a baby dragon quilt, and I'm really excited about getting started on this. And I'll be using some maybe non-traditional baby fabrics, but I think it's going to look like a baby quilt when it's done. At least I hope it will. And all the templates that I'm going to use will be available on my website, sparkstudio.com. So if you want to make your own baby dragon quilt, you'll be able to find information there about amounts of fabric and that kind of thing, as well as the actual template for the dragon that I'm going to be using. So let's get started. Baby dragons on the way. On my website, sparkstudio.com, you can find this file and download it and print out if you wish. And it includes a scale diagram of the quilt, and when I finish it I'll put a colored picture there as well. And then it has a list of the fabrics and how much I purchased of each one, and then another page that tells the cut, and also the template for the dragon, which I will show you later, and a little picture that shows you which fabrics I used for which parts of the dragon. I've got everything numbered and laid out. And so if this is something you want to duplicate, you're able to go and find that information, and hopefully that will make it easier for you. So today I'm going to start doing my basic fabric cuts. I've got an internal area, which is where the dragon's going to be, and then I'm doing 3 borders on this particular quilt. And I'm going to start by cutting all of these pieces, and then the dragon will come a little bit later. I'm going to start by cutting the background that will be behind the baby dragon, and then the clouds. And the background's actually going to be this entire square here, and then the clouds will be appliqued over top of that. So I need a piece that is 22.5 inches long by 26.5 inches. So I've got my fabric laid out here and flattened out, and I'm going to start by just straightening the edge on that piece. And then I'm going to move this down to line up with the 0 line, as I call it. I said earlier that I wanted to cut this blue piece for the background the entire size here, and I went to cut this and I realized that I miscalculated and I don't have quite enough fabric for this entire piece. So what I'm going to do is cut a shorter piece, but the cloud fabric is going to be enough to make up for the difference. I'm not so sure that I can't make it work that way. So I'm going to cut this piece 22 inches wide, and then I'll trim it for the 26.5 inches that I need. And then, as I said, I'll cut the cloud piece so that it's going to make up for the distance that I'm missing. And I just won't have the back behind the entire cloud, which is going to be fine. So we'll trim this at the 22 and then turn it. Line it up with the straight edge here and trim the selvage, and then I will measure, and then 26.5 inches on this cut. This will be the cloud that the dragon is sitting on or standing on. And so again, I have it lined up here, selvage is folded nice and even. Trim this edge. And then I am cutting an 8.5 inch piece. Trim the selvage. And I'm going to do 26.5 inches on this one as well. The next piece that I'm going to cut is the inside border, which is going to be black. This border is a 1-inch border, So I will be cutting 1.5 inch pieces to allow seam allowance. Straighten my edge first. And you'll notice I have quite a bit of fabric here because I've decided to do black on the back, which is not typically what I would do on a baby quilt, but it just seems to go with the dragon theme. And this particular black has this gold fleck in it, which also seems to look dragony to me. So I'm cutting 4 strips, the entire width of the fabric here in this. And these are 1.5 inches wide. Two of these strips are going to be 24.5 inches, and 2 of them are going to be 26.5 inches. So just trimming the selvage. And then I need 2 that are 26.5 inches. The middle border is one of the reds that I'm using for the dragon, and it is a 2-inch wide border, so I'm going to be cutting 4 strips that are 2.5 inches wide. And all of these strips will be 28.5 inches long. The outer border is 4.5 inches wide. And so I found this piece that is an ombre with the darker gold and the lighter gold. So if you look at my color chart, I called for a darker gold and a lighter, and I'm using the same fabric because I'll just cut the applique pieces I need from the different shades of the fabric. But I thought it would look nice to use this for the border. So I'm going to cut my lengths, but I'm not going to trim them until I'm actually ready to do the border, so I can see how I want to place that ombre and where I want the darks and the lights. So I'm just going to trim off the selvage here, and as I said, I'll cut the widths, but I'm not going to adjust the length on them until I'm ready to sew them onto the quilt. And these pieces are 4.5 inches wide. I'm also using this ombre for the binding on the outside edges of the quilt, so I thought it would look nice against the black on the back. And sometimes I do choose to use the same color for binding as I've used on the outside border of a quilt, which I'm going to do in this case. Then I need 4 2.5 inch strips that I will be using later for binding the edges of the quilt. So this is my plowed fabric, and right now it is upside down. The right side is on the surface here. And I've got a piece of fusing web. This is the paper side that's up. And I just trimmed it so that it aligns with the sides and the top of this. It's about 5 inches wide here. And I'm just going to draw my clouds on this, and you can draw them any way you want. You can look at my diagram or just do your own cloud shape. I just wanted it a little higher in the middle, a little bit lower at the edges. I'm going to leave the top part, that's going to get trimmed afterwards, but I don't want a lot of fusing web below the cloud level because it does add weight to this, and I'm going to be putting the dragon on top of it with fusing web, which will add more layers. So I'm going to trim this about 2 centimeters, 3/4 of an inch away from my line. So I'm getting ready to fuse here, and I'm using this non-stick fabric sheet underneath to protect my ironing board because I am going to fuse this very close to the edges of the fabric, and I don't want a sticky mess on my ironing board. No steam in your iron, and then you need about 10 seconds of time in order to fuse the web to the fabric. And you can use a timer, you can count in your head. I'm talking while I'm doing a video, so I just kind of guesstimate and then move over to the next section when you think that's fused, and I'll show you how to check if it's fused or not in a minute here. So to check for the fuse on it, if you just take a corner of your web or paper and start peeling it away, the web should stick to the fabric, and I can tell it's there because there's a plastic feel to the fabric right there, but I don't actually want to peel that off just now. So then you're going to take your shears and cut so this gives me the top edge of my background cloud. To peel off this paper, and it should come off easily. If it doesn't, you need to go back and fuse some more. Now I want this whole piece 22.5 inches long. So now I'm lining up the bottom of this with the 22.5 inch line, which is the full length that I want this piece to be. And I've got the top on the 0 line. And then I'm just going to put a couple pins in this to hold it because I need to transfer it to the ironing board to fuse it together. So I'm at the ironing board, and I'm going to put the steam back on my iron because the paper's gone now, so I want the steam to help get a really solid fuse. And I only need to fuse along this edge here because that's the only part that has the fusing web. And again, it's a 10-second fuse. Now I pinned a little bit away from the iron so that I'm not ironing on top of the pins. These pins are glass heads, so I could do that, but you sometimes get little dents from the edge of the pin. There are times I iron on pins, but not very many, and not for this purpose. So then what I'm going to do is go to the sewing machine, and I'm going to do a row of satin stitch along here to applique the cloud on top of the blue fabric. After I've done that, I'm actually going to go in the back and I'm going to trim off the extra blue that is below where the applique is, because we don't really need that extra layer in there once I've got my cloud attached to it. I'm at the sewing machine getting ready to set up for appliquing the cloud to the background, and so I'm going to be using a zigzag stitch, not the 3-step zigzag, just the regular zigzag, and I'm going to turn that into something we call a satin stitch. Now the machine actually is already set for this stitch. My width is on 5. I'm going to change that to 3. 3 is the most common width that I use when I'm doing applique, and my length is on 2, and I'm going to change that to 0.5, which is the most common length that I use when I'm doing applique. I have a couple choices of feet that I could use for this. I could use the standard machine foot, but my machine came with some extra ones, or you can buy these for your machine. One of them is a Clearview foot, and the Clearview foot and this other foot have a smooth metal plate on the back that helps the machine move more smoothly when it's sewing satin stitch and other types of decorative stitches. So I could use the Clearview foot, which I do like because you can see through it. It's a little easier to see exactly where your needle is going. But I also have another foot that's specifically designed for applique, and it looks like the Clearview, except there's nothing in the middle here, and so I'm even better able to see exactly where the machine is going. So I'm going to use this applique foot today. So I'm going to start with the needle down on the left side. The edge of the needle is along the edge of my cloud here, and so I'm basically just going to cover the edge of the cloud with satin stitching to secure it to the sky. And I'm going to stop with my needle down here. I need to do a little pivot, so I'm going to raise the foot And it doesn't need to be much because this is a very gentle curve. And usually on gentle curves, I can just manipulate the fabric and I don't have to do the pivots. But if you have trouble getting around a curve, you can always pivot. Now, when I come down to this point here, I'm going to sew a little bit past it. I'm going to stop with the needle down on the right side, and then I'm going to turn. Now, when I turn, I need to do 2 more stitches. So I'm going to go back, 1, 2, and turn, because again, I want to be right on the edge of the cloud here. Now at the end, it's not essential that you lock this because you're going to sew over top of it, but if I was going to lock it, typically on applique, I use this lock stitch button here, and what that will do then is lock my stitching basically in place. It moves very, very slightly, and then you don't get the bulk of the thread that you would get if you used your reverse. My satin stitching is completed, and I mentioned that I'm going to do some trimming on the back, so I can see this stitching here, and it's fused down to about here, and I'm just going to trim it. The next step is preparing to put the dragon onto the quilt background. This template is available at sewsparkstudio.com. The first thing you'll need to do is print it out and tape it together. Now, I actually have 2 templates available. This is the dragon the way I want it to look on the finished quilt, so I want it to be facing towards the right. But when you do applique with fusing web, if you have an image that has 2 different sides to it, you actually need to reverse the image in order to get it the way you want it on your finished quilt. So you'll find 2 templates on the site. You'll find a left-facing template and a right-facing template. So I'm going to start by taping this one together, even though that's not the one I'm going to use to trace the fusing web, because I like to have a right-facing one for a reference. And so that's why I've got both of them there. Now, if I was doing this at home, I wouldn't exactly do this. I would have a right-facing one, and I would actually flip it and trace the back and use that one for the applique. But I thought, well, you know, technology, I can reverse the image, and with a few touches here and there, I didn't need to do the tracing, and so I'm saving you some work for this. Now, where do I get my images? Well, I don't necessarily draw right out of my head. I'm inspired by things I find online, so I did find a dragon image online that was the inspiration for this baby dragon, and then I sketched that out in the size that I wanted for my quilt. Now, if you want a bigger quilt, you could take this template and go somewhere that has a bigger photocopy or bigger paper, and you could make it bigger. So now what I'm doing is taping this together, and I tried to put matching points on this, but the most important thing is the lines. And again, if it's not 100%, it was a little tricky because what I was trying to do was to make something that you could print on standard size paper, because I don't know about you, but on my printer, I'm not able to do the large sheets of paper. So I tried to make it so that anyone would be able to print this out in your home. So I'm lining this up again. It's not 100% perfect, but when you're tracing for the fusing web, you can correct that. So I've trimmed this so I can line it up for taping. I'm going to trim this one. And then I'm just going to trim off the bottom here because I don't need that. And that's the left-facing baby dragon. Sorry, I'm a little left-right challenged on occasion. So now I'm going to tape together my other template, because this is the one I'm actually going to use for tracing for the applique, because I want my dragon left-facing and I need a right-facing template. This is a fairly complex applique design with a lot of pieces in it. I'm going to talk you through a bit of it and then maybe video and speed up the rest. I do have this reference sheet, and this sheet has to do with the colors that I'm using for each part of the dragon. And so I'm using this in part to help me trace out my dragon, but I'm going to start with this eye area. And the color 1 is in this area, the nose, this area, and underneath here. But I'm actually going to trace it out in 4 pieces because of the way it's layered. So I'm going to trace this part right here. And this is paper side up, the web is on the back. This is my favorite fusible web product. It's called Wonder Under. There are others out there and you're free to use whichever one you want, but this is the one I like. Now when I have layering happening here, this part's going to be over top of this. So what I do is I actually make it a little bit bigger because I'm going to overlap that when I fuse them together. And then I just do a dotted line to show the original line. And I'm going to do the same here because the nose here is going to overlap this, and so is the tooth. Now here, I'm going to go right on the line, and then right here I'm going to go a little bit below again, and then this is the outside edge here. And then I just, like I said, I do a dotted line as a reference point for me when I'm starting to fuse these together. And then I'm going to draw this line here. This line's actually going to be, I'll do something with the applique stitching to show where that line is when I do the rest of it. And then I'm just going to put a positioning line for the eye, just the outside one. But I'm actually going to cut out this whole piece like this, and then the other parts of the eye, for example, will go over top of this piece when it's all fused together. Now, I like to have references. So I've got numbers for colors, so I don't want to confuse myself. So I'm going to call this A, and then I put an A on here as well, just so, especially when I'm doing these spikes, I'm going to want to know which one is which. So I do something, normally I'd use numbers, but I don't want to mix up my color numbers with my piece numbers. So like I said, I'm going to use letters of the alphabet. And if I run out of letters, I'll double A and double B and so on. I'm going to start out doing all of these number 1 pieces. I have some scrap pieces from other things that I've done, so I'm trying to use those up while I do this. So this one's going to work here. I went back and decided as I'm working that I will also put the number of the color fabric on each of these pieces. It'll just make it a little quicker when I start sorting them out to fuse them to fabrics. So I did that on all the pieces that I've traced so far. And then I'm going to carry on and continue tracing the rest of the pieces for the dragon applique. I'm going to cut these apart and separate them into piles according to the different colors that they need to go with. So I trimmed all my pieces. Now you'll notice that I didn't cut on the lines, I trimmed outside them. And I just trimmed them to make it easier to work with them. If you did cut on the lines, it's not a big deal. They're still going to work. You just gave yourself an extra step that you didn't need to do, because normally I'm going to cut this and the fabric when they're fused together. The number 1 pieces are for the face and the tummy, and I have this cream color with a gold fleck in it that I'm going to use for that. And you want to take your iron and make sure that the steam is turned off, because we're fusing paper and we don't want it to all wrinkle up. And we're going to fuse on the wrong side of the fabric, because when you're done, the fusing web's here. This is what we're going to see. So I just take my pieces. Now this is a piece of fabric that I purchased for this, so it hasn't been used. So I always think, how am I going to use this fabric the next time for another project? And so do I want a square left over? Do I want a long piece the width of the fabric? Really, you can decide yourself. I think I'm going to run these pieces across the top. I don't worry too much about grain line when I'm doing applique, unless there is some kind of print or stripe that's going to be significant when you cut out the pieces and fuse them on. And for this is a random fleck that's on here, so I don't have to be concerned about that. So I'm just laying them out fairly close together to conserve fabric as much as possible. And I've decided to kind of go across the top here like this. I think I'll put this piece here, and that way I've got a significant amount of fabric left over that I can use for something else. And so I position them, make sure you're not in the selvage because the selvage doesn't have the design on it. And then it's a 10-second fuse. And so if I am talking, I just kind of guesstimate 10 seconds. And if I'm not talking, sometimes I count in my head, or if you have a timer and you want to watch a timer, I'm not that exact or precise when I do this. And I've just shifted over for the rest of it, so that probably wasn't a full 10 seconds. But I'll show you in a second here how I test the fusing when I'm done. If you just peel the edge of one of your pieces, and when you pull that up, if I actually pull the paper off, I can see the paper is easily pulling off and the web is on the fabric, and it feels kind of plasticky if you feel it. I don't know if it's really showing up on the camera. It is a little bit shiny in the light. But I don't want to peel the whole thing off right now because those are my cutting lines when I cut these pieces out. So this is color number 1. So color number 2 is a lighter gold colored fabric. So I have this ombre fabric, and I'm actually going to use this light section right here. I just have 2 small pieces. These are for some of the horns on the dragon. Just fit those in place there, and 10 seconds. And color number 3 is the darker gold, so I'm going to use the edge of this piece in order to get that darker color. That is these spikes right here. And then a couple of the horns. So I'm going to position these like this, and 10 seconds again. Color number 4, I call this a medium red, and I have some pieces that were left when I cut the borders, and so some of my pieces for this color are fairly small, so I can fit them on one of these pieces. And then a couple are larger, and I'm going to use the bigger piece of fabric for those. So these ones I'll start out with. Let's move them over a little. Always something that you can do with those small pieces of fabric that are left over. 10 seconds. And then I have 2 other reds that I call dark red and very dark red. And so number 5 is the dark red. Number 7 is white. This is a Kona solid, and it actually wasn't called white. I think it was called snow. It's not quite as stark of a white, and that's what I want for these pieces. So this is for the whites of the eyes and the teeth, and of course a solid like this, which side is right side, which side's wrong side, doesn't really matter. And 10 seconds again. Number 8 is for the claws. So I've got this kind of a cream color with sort of a white streak in it that I think will work well for the claws. So number 9, I have this brown, and I'm going to use it for the eyes. Now all of these pieces can be cut out along the lines that you traced earlier. I'm at the ironing board, and we're ready to start putting together our dragon. So I'm going to use my fabric pressing sheet for this because this is a little bit more complicated pattern. And the way you use this is you have your drawing and you actually put the sheet over top of it. And the drawing's a little bigger than the sheet, but we can work with that. This is the left-facing dragon, the way I want the drawing to look when it's completed. So I'm going to start at the top here. And then you've got all your pieces. And typically I do not take off the paper until I'm ready to use it because there's guidelines and things on it. I have my other drawing handy in case I need some help with the lettering that I used on the pieces. When you go to take these pieces off, they should come apart quite easily. If they are sticking or if it seems to be just patchy on the fabric, you need to go back and do some more fusing. You didn't leave the iron on there long enough, so redo that if you need to. So this is the body of the dragon. And so you can see how I can see the lines here, so I know exactly where to put that piece. I've got my iron here and I'm actually going to fuse these pieces together before I put them onto the quilt. The beauty of this piece underneath here is that I can fuse these and then I'll be able to peel them off of that and the fusing web will still be on the pieces and I'll be able to fuse it to the fabric. So here's the body. I'm thinking here as I do this about pieces that are layered over or under other pieces. So this foot is going to be underneath this body piece. And then all of these little claw pieces are going to be underneath. So this one goes here underneath this one. So I'm actually going to move that out of the way and I'm just going to fuse that. And I don't do a full 10-second fuse for this. I just want enough of a fuse so it's going to stick together and stick a little bit to the paper here, but not the full fuse because I'm going to do that a full 10-second fuse when I fuse it onto the fabric that I'm going to put it on. So now this is in place and it won't move. And so that makes it easier to work with other pieces around it. So now for this one, there are some pieces that need to go underneath. So we've got these toes here. Oh, I'm forgetting which direction they go. So that one's going to go there. And then the other set of toes are here. And the other piece I'm going to put in place is this little piece of the underbelly. And I'm actually going to do a little tap here. So these don't move while I position these. Now, if this shifts a bit, you can always just move it back so it's in position. It's a bit like when you're tracing things, except here we're fusing fabric. And then when you think you have it in the position you want it, I'm going to go in here just at the bottom here. I want to leave the top loose because I need to do some work with the spikes up there. Just enough again to stick those pieces together temporarily at least. And then I'm going to go in with my spikes from the top here. And if you have to shift things around a bit and it doesn't exactly follow the lines, that's not a problem. It's still going to look like a dragon when we're done. And then I'm also going to do the tail part right now as well. So the center one first. And then the two outside pieces. And they don't have to go in any particular order. Now, the tummy part we're going to wait because there is a piece here. This overlaps it. So I'm going to do this one before I do this one. I think I'm probably going to have to come back down and do that. So we're going to shift this and remove this temporarily. And you can see it sticking just a little bit. But when I peel this off, I can still feel the fusing web underneath there. I don't know if you can see the shine on it, but the web is still there. So just set that aside for now. I'll take this piece off and shift and work on the face part for right now. We're going to start with some of these spikes here because they're underneath. Next piece, I'm going to put this piece, and then we'll do these two background pieces here. And I'm going to keep this piece handy just because I drew the eye on there and it might help me with placement later. Before I do any more here, I need to do the eye on this side. Now, I don't know how well you can see what I'm seeing, but this fabric's a little bit see-through, so I can see a bit of the outline here, but sometimes I lift up and look just to verify placement of different pieces. And this tooth is over top of this and a little bit underneath this. So I'm actually going to peel up the edge of this, and then I can slip my tooth in there. Okay, I think that looks pretty good. See a little bit of separation in this area, but my satin stitching is going to come over that and we'll completely cover that up so you won't know that it exists there. All right, now at the bottom here, I do need to do a little bit more fusing down here, but my plastic is here, so I'm going to have to peel the face off. So now we'll put the sheet over the bottom part of the drawing here. And there's the dragon pieces all put together. Now there's not a lot of definition yet in the face area, but I am going to applique this with black thread, and that will really pull out the features and make the things you want to stand out, stand out. Next step, we're going to actually fuse this to the top of the quilt. I have the backing with the dragon on it, and I did do a little checking. I used my seam gauge to measure. I figured that closest point here, and then closest point here to center it this way, and then I just lifted up the edge. I don't think you can see that on the camera, and measured again to the toes and to the horn at the top here. And so the dragon is pretty much in the center with the body on the cloud, and the head is with the sky background. I haven't been using steam because when I'm on that plastic sheet, the plastic will condense a little bit, so I don't use steam on it. I didn't mention that earlier. So I am going to go back to steam, and now I'm going to do that 10-second fuse that's going to securely fuse this to the background. Before I start sewing, I'm going to fill in some of the detail lines using my Pilot friction pen, one of my favorite tools, and these marks will just steam off after I'm finished doing the applique stitching. So the kinds of things that I'm going to put in are the lines that outline the legs, for example.